Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Hey, it's another year, another time to make some more money, and I've got the course for you. Start the conversation, get the meeting will help your team, both business development, sales development, get into those new cold accounts, whether that function is under marketing or sales. I'll help you with that by starting organic, natural conversations, not pitching. Have people open up with you, build up a connection with them, understand your total addressable market, prioritize it, and put in a system that scales, that's predictable, that works the way you want it to work instead of the old school pitch. Believe me, I've sat through so many of these cold calling seminars, courses, books, and I've been doing it for 30 years, and it's evolved. And what I'm doing today is what's working in today's world. It works naturally, and people are just loving it, getting meetings, closing deals, and doing it without the rejection that is typically there in sales. So check it out at b2brevenue.com under the training tab. You can schedule a call with me. We can talk it over. I'll explain how it works and how we can work together on it. You can buy it per student, or I'll customize it for your particular product and team and coach you through that process. Also, if you're a sales leader and you want predictability, you want direction, momentum, and control with your deals, you can sign up for that course as well. Same type of model. A year-long access to it. It's content, community, and coaching, all included at b2brevenue.com. You can get my free ebook there on how companies make product selections. That's all free. Let's get into the interview, but I want to make sure you're checking out my partners. They're in the show notes. This week, it's Pipedrive and CoVideo. Pipedrive is the new CRM. It's been out for 5 years. I've been using it forever. I love that. It's connected up with your email, your calendar, and now they have team capabilities. CoVideo is the video email system. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's the way to break into new accounts. It's so much more engaging than text. Check them out. Also, make sure you're checking me out on LinkedIn, Brian G. Burns on LinkedIn. Let's get into the interview. I'll sum it up at the end. Hey, Soon, thanks for joining us today as a way of getting started. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I am a resident brand nerd. I think I've grown up being in love with certain brands. I follow brands. I get sad when some of my brands, go out of business. And I've always been super curious as to why some brands actually stand the test of time and other brands don't. And I think that curiosity is what prompted me to write a book about the whole topic called Iconic Advantage.
And why brands versus customer service or product strategy or visionary?
Sure. I think everything you just mentioned, customer service, products, vision, all that feed into what I consider the brand equity. And to me, brands are kind of like people. They're things that you have a relationship with, just like your mother or father, your sister, brother, or your good friends. And that idea of having a relationship with something that's inanimate, something that you can't really touch and feel, is actually really interesting from my point of view.
And has your focus been solely on B2C, or have you dabbled in B2B?
I will be honest. A lot of my focus has been B2B. A lot of the book was written, B2C. And a lot of the book was written from a B2C perspective, but I've recently spent a lot of time with B2B companies, and the same principles about building a great brand with a different audience, which is really not consumers, but more your customers, apply equally as well when you're talking to, mass consumers. And it applies equally well as if you're just talking to your top 10 customers. So, no, I found that a lot of the B2C concepts actually translate very well to the B2B world.
Yeah, they do. And I think people forget that.
Yeah, they really do. They think, B2B is such a different animal,
Yeah.
Do trade shows, you do sales materials that are different and all that. I go, yeah, but you're still dealing with people that have to make a decision on whether or not to trust you, whether or not that, they like what you're offering, your product, and it's still people making the end decision. And someday there'll be robots making all these decisions, but for now, it's still about people.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no robots making buying decisions right now, unless it's equities, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you and I'd be out of a job pretty soon, I guess.
Yeah. Our two bots talking to each other.
Yeah, exactly. You're like Watson A and I'm Watson B or something. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think too many founders, and especially today when it's so easy to start a company, you don't have to buy servers, you don't have to hire people, you can outsource so much of it, and you don't need much money anymore. And you go after a category, or you try and build a category, but people really don't know who you are, what you're about. And I think that marketing piece has now become so much more important, so much harder than it was.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because there used to be other, call them structural barriers to entry. And if you somehow were better at some of those structural barriers, whether it be better at setting up a computing platform, or better at servicing customer calls, or whatever it might be. But all that can be outsourced now fairly cheaply, right? And everything's basically ASP, right? So in that scenario, then all of a sudden brands become more in the forefront. They're also, more your limited toolbox only has some things that basically are focused on brand. So you're right. In some ways, what you have left is, who are you? What are you selling? Why should I care? And how are you going to deliver that? And at the end of the day, answers to all those questions and the repeated answer to all those questions build your brand.
Yeah. And I think too many people think it's just category. Now,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, category is part of it, but if you have, 5 people in a category, then what is it?
Well, a lot of people think you're right. It's like, oh, I'm jumping on the right wave, right?
Yeah.
There's new categories developing, and we're all, all boats rise because of the tides rising, right? I get that, but you're right. At some point, there's a natural growth and maturity curve, and when you hit that growth and maturity curve, when just saying that you're, artificial intelligence for cats, okay, the new category, artificial intelligence for cats,
Yep.
And you were one of the 5 first people in it, right? Yeah, and the demand is blowing up, and that's great. But at some point, people are like, artificial intelligence for cats. I've heard that's so old news, And there's like 18 people doing it. So why you? Just because you've been doing it longer? This other guy's got a better mousetrap than you, right?
Well, that's it.
A mousetrap.
Yeah, because if you have an engineering founder, they think it's the product. If you have, a visionary, they think it's the marketing and sales. Or if you have, an iconic leader, they think it's their leadership and their funding.
The funny thing is, all those things are all sort of call it ingredients for the recipe for a great brand, and you need all those things.
Yeah.
And so, trying to understand how to actually keep the vision, the product, all those elements coordinated, and sort of delivering on a consistent message is oftentimes the challenge.
Yeah. And do you find that too many marketing people feel that the brand is just the logo?
I think there is a perception that the brand is not only that, the name, the logo, the look and the feel, maybe the voice, and then the ads they see, right? All the sort of what I call esoteric, sort of sensorial items that kind of make up what people think the brand is. And then they also think of the brand marketers as the brand police. The font has to be this, and the and the color you're off. It's wrong Pantone, and I think they're missing the whole point, which is they are part of the brand. What they do is part of the brand. That whole part feeds up to the brand experience. It's much more than what you see from the name or a logo or the visual. It's all those elements together, and it's just the same thing. It's like, your neighbor has a certain brand to you. Do you trust them? Are they the neighbor that annoys you? Are they the neighbor that always is considerate? And, everything they do, from the way they talk to you to how they, whether or not they trim the lawn in their house or just leave weeds growing all over, all that matters.
It does. Yeah. And I always use the analogy because when you move into a new neighborhood, there's always that one neighbor that's kind, that brings a gift over, that helps you. And
yes.
Nothing official. It's just a nice person. And all of a sudden you go from strangers to friends almost instantaneously.
Exactly. And then that's a great analogy to think about business, right? I mean, business, it's what you do. It's not what you say or how you look. Because a lot of people think it's what you say and how you look. It's actually what you do along with what you say and how. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so this is really a leadership issue versus a marketing issue.
It very much is. It's a leadership, and I'll call it this too. Strong leadership, but also just as strong followership, meaning the people that need to execute on the leader's visions or the leader's visions. Those followers also have to lead by example too, in terms of what they do.
Yeah. But how do you keep it from being just that individual, like, a Bezos, a Musk, Jobs?
Yeah, no. So
it's kind of hard, isn't it?
Well, people like that have big personalities, but even then, you've got to trust the people to execute against that. And we talk about it in the book. We call it what's your brand DNA? What's your brand pyramid?
Yeah.
And I looked at probably 20 different frameworks around brand DNAs, and a lot of them were very complicated. A lot of them had, they would take like a month to fill out basically, and a lot of workshops. The way we designed it, it's something that somebody probably sitting down with a good hour or two and just answering a few questions could at least get a good first pass to at least share with other people in the organization to continue to build the DNA and have conversation around that. And it really starts off with sort of, think about 4 levels on this brand pyramid or DNA. And the first level being, what are your values? What do you believe? What are the things that when no one else is in the room help guide you when you're faced with an ethical dilemma, that helps with decision making, and also helps with recruiting. It's really the bread and butter of, what makes your company's heartbeat. And I feel like so many people, when they're thinking about branding, they don't start with values. They start with, what's our message and what's our logo, right? That's sort of the end product of the process of understanding what's your values and what do you stand for, and what do you care about, what do you believe. And then from there, going to the next rung of who are you? What's your character? And I always think about character in terms of not, people throw out like, oh, you're nice, you're kind. But I was thinking about it in terms of archetypes. There's this book called Heroes and Outlaws, and they outline 12 archetypes that are used throughout history in all the Hollywood movies. There's things like heroes, outlaws, explorers, sages, lovers, magicians. There's all these cool things. And of those 12 archetypes, which 1 or 2 really resonate with who you are? And that then kind of defines your personality. Your core personality, and knowing your values and your core personality, the next question you need to answer is, what's your promise to your customer or to your consumer? What is it that when you can easily say, I promise you what? That I deliver what? In what way? And if you can simply articulate that and be consistent about who you are as a character and your values, then you're more than likely going to be at least received and heard and at least regarded. The next question is the hardest one, though. Probably the one at the very top is, in terms of how you deliver your promise, how are you doing it more uniquely and better than your competition? Because, the first 3 kind of make me say, you're a solid person. I like you, Brian. You got good values. I can tell you're very passionate about helping people out. That's great. It resonates with me. Your character, I can see there's this sort of a hero aspect to you, explorer aspect to you. Great. I can resonate with that. At least I know who you are. And then what's your promise? You're going to help me be great at B2B sales. Well, how are you doing it differently than all the other people are trying to help me with B2B sales? And I just, I look at what you're doing, and it's a personal mantra, there's a personal touch, and I can tell on everything that you're doing online and on the YouTube and everything else, it's this idea that's human to human. And you're really helping, I think, us be good at a B2B sales perspective from an individual basis versus call it a corporate platform basis, which I think is actually the building blocks to be good at any type of platform.
And that was kind of a breakthrough for me on my sales podcast. Was I rebranded it from my selling approach to what I call the brutal truth. Because
I like that.
It was what I felt was everybody who was talking about sales, it was all fluff.
Mm-hmm.
It was all, be nice, have a positive mental attitude, work hard. And it's like, yeah.
Remember their names and their kids and, and what ice cream flavor they like.
And you're like, I think that's been done. I think that's covered.
Right.
What wasn't covered was cutting through to what really matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now,
I think, that's right.
When you were describing that pyramid, and I'm looking at it right now, I was thinking, who's doing this really well today? And, Tesla just popped into my mind.
Yeah, I think Tesla, you start off with the values. They're all about what I call transformational, transformation, right? And they're all about kind of throwing out the norms and what was regarded as sort of accepted and saying, no, what's the consumer, what's the customer need? And let's redesign around that. I talk about it in the book where, they decided and they forego the whole dealership network. Instead, they do direct to consumer in malls, in, the main streets, in places where you would find, Neiman Marcus and Saks and, Williams-Sonoma or Pottery Barn. They're right next to them. And because they want to go direct to the consumer and take out the whole kind of used car salesman kind of, the stigma. And, I think that all goes back to their value of transformation. And I think the other thing is they are very focused on, I think, not only just sort of breaking the norms. I think they're really focused on, I think, this idea of how do I say this? Eco-friendly, ergonomics, and all this other stuff that's really focused on how do you live a better life, and how does a vehicle fit into the idea of a better life, and whether it's you driving it or the car driving itself, how does that make your life better?
Right, because, the image and the feeling and the sensation you get when you think Tesla, it's not just that it's an electric car. You get that it's the next generation of cars, that it's, it can be powered by itself off of solar panels on top of the garage. It could possibly drive itself, and it can drive itself in certain situations.
Absolutely.
It can come to you.
They're very much, and when I think about their archetype, it's very much creator is a big part of who they are. They're creators, right? And I will say this, both good and bad. There are times when I think it's over the top. There's a bit of outlaw in that personality, in terms of we're going to F the world because we're going to do it the way it should have been built if there was no legacy, right? And I think sometimes it's great, but sometimes I think Elon probably takes it a little too far in terms of, his personal life represents his professional life. And when those two, that outlaw and a personal life, sometimes people have a hard time of disassociating what's happening on a personal level with what's represented on a professional level. And maybe that's part of the outlaw is like you just don't care.
Well, I think it is. I think it's kind of that cowboy, which you call an outlaw, pretty much the same thing. Mm-hmm. But it also, I think, excites him because what excites engineers is, thinking years ahead, right?
Yes.
Playing with toys, right? The hottest stuff, building their own chipset, their own AI.
Exactly. No, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it.
And that attracts the best engineers in the world.
And that's exactly who you want. And that culture attracts, if you want to change the world, come work with us. If you want to make widgets, go work for them. It's kind of an interesting choice, right?
Yeah, you don't hear any kid go, I really want to go work at Ford.
Oh boy. Yes, I know. Yeah.
Right? You don't.
Yeah, no, they don't. No.
I hope I can get that intern at GM.
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh.
And then that promise, I guess you get that like with Apple, it's going to work, right? It's like, it's high quality, you'd be shocked when it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I think what they do, their promise is we bring great design to life, and they really do. I mean, they're not a technology company. I know they use a lot of technology, but most of it's second generation stuff. It's generally not leading edge. But what they do incorporate is that second generation technology with beautiful design, both, physical design, but also user experience design. And I think those two combined, you feel very proud and you also enjoy your interactions with the Apple products and brands.
And that's it, because I've tried Android products and stuff, and it's more than a noticeable difference.
Oh God, I was forced to use one when I was in Europe for half a year, and it just drove me nuts because it was so hard to use.
And I didn't turn into a Mac person probably until about 10 years ago. But then when I did, I was like, I can't even think of going back to a PC.
It's very hard. It's very hard. It's the user intuitiveness of the interface, right? And it's not just that. They know what matters in terms of the moments that matter. Most people, you think about one of the key moments is when you get the product home and you open it up. And what does most people have? Like, let's say we bought a flash drive that's wrapped in one of those big plastic things, and you have to take your scissors and cut it, and then you have to rip it open with your fingers, and it's still very painful and hard to do, right? In terms of separating the melded together plastic. Well, what Apple thought about is one of the most important moments is unveiling their treasure. Yeah. And, you think about the iPhone or iPad or the iPod. When you open that box, first the box looks great. Then you open it up and it's like multi-layered, as if they're presenting each layer as a layer of treasure for you to think about, almost like a jewelry box too. And I always ask people when I do these talks, how many people still have an Apple, not product, an Apple package? And over half the room raises their hand. I go, do you use it for anything? And no one goes, everyone looks at me, no. Why aren't you throwing it out? It looks too beautiful to throw out.
It's crazy, because right above my desk here, there's got to be 5 iPhone boxes going back 5 years.
Oh my God! One per year. You're amazing.
And I'm like, I go, why haven't I thrown them out? There's nothing in them.
No, there's not. Exactly.
It's just my museum.
Exactly. I have. This is really crazy. I still have the Apple I bought. I'm in my early 50s. I still have the Apple box, the Apple computer box I bought when I was in college, and it was the one with the friendly Mac that, remember, they put like 2 feet on it and it kind of walked. It looked like one of those droids. I still have that box, and it's over like 30 years.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful box.
Now, you've done this before with companies. Do you find what I've typically found when I've gone into a company is they try and fit what they're doing into your model versus your model into what they should be doing?
Yeah, that's natural. That's always the case, right? And part of it is, when you're working with organizations, they have certain amount of inertia, routines, practices. And I find that if we're, unless you're changing the entire leadership and, cutting the fish head off right from the beginning, I find that trying to take the existing routines is an easier way to try to implement some of my ideas without trying to change too many routines. Maybe add something to an existing routine or modify an existing routine, but not bring in too many new routines. And so, yes, a lot of times what I'm trying to do is take a lot of stuff that I have and look at what they already have and try to figure out a way to marry those two.
Yeah. And have you seen companies' purposes and values just be irrelevant to what they sell?
Well, I say this, and I'm back to write a blog on this, but I call it, there are a lot of inauthentics out there. Yeah. And, I just call them out. I think Facebook is one of them. I think Google is another, where
do no
you
evil.
Read you read their mission statement, right? Democratizing information, right? And I was like, but you're also commercializing it. You're also monetizing it, right? Yeah. And in some ways, you're not even, you might give it freedom, but freedom to the worst people too, right? So, this idea of the verb of democratization is great, but it's to who that matters. And what's the consequences of that, I think also has to be contemplated. And so I find that, when you look at, or I think Facebook is about making connections, right? But again, are we connecting to the people we really want to be connected to? Or are we connecting into the Cambridge Analyticas of the world that we don't want to be connected to, right?
Yeah.
So I find that a lot of times companies like that have lofty mission statements, but how does that gel with how they make money? And sometimes I find that they're not authentic.
Yeah, I see that as well. And I heard a podcast with a CMO, and they were talking about their culture and stuff. And I just said, well, what does that have to do with your customers and your product? I saw it as, nice, idealistic, part of society and everything, but that doesn't help me connect with you and your product.
I agree with you. I mean, I've been to the Google campuses, and they're very they're well stocked with the best food in the world, right? It's all local or whatever, and so the work environment is amazing. The offices are amazing. I have friends that work there. They treat employees pretty well, but they, I think it's still focused on making money from your information versus really trying to push the idea of how do we liberate you with information. And I have to give them credit. In some ways, they've really liberated my life. I mean, I imagine the days when we didn't have Google Earth or Google Maps or Google stuff like that. That's added a lot of value. But I think what's hidden underneath that is there's a cost to have that freedom, so to speak. It's not free. And that, if they could be a little more upfront about that, maybe it would be easier. But it's all underneath where everything I'm doing is actually adding value to them in different ways.
And how much of this is art versus just good hard work?
And when you say art, what do you mean by that? Versus, how would you contrast it?
Okay, see, like finding the right point of difference versus a good point of difference.
Point of difference, I think it is, there are just questions that you need to ask. And part of it, then you need to pressure test your answers with not just your people, but really with your customers and your consumers, right? Yeah. But generally, I say, look, think of a Venn diagram with three circles intersecting in the middle, and the middle being your point of difference. The three things that you need to think about is, first, what are you good at? Don't create a point of difference on something you're not good at, because then, quite frankly, you're going to underdeliver and overpromise. So first and foremost, list out your strengths. List out things that you're actually enjoy doing, okay? You might be good at it, but if you don't enjoy doing it, that's not good enough either, right? So stuff that you're good at and you enjoy doing, list those things out. Then think about, of those things, which have the most impact for your customers or your consumers or for the general world. And those will then rise to the top as being great candidates, potentially create your point of difference. And the third is just look at your competition and figure out, versus your competition, is this something where you could actually stand out? Or maybe there's another competitor doing it, but at least there's room for two of you to really talk this, and maybe you can talk about it slightly different. When you find the intersection of what you're good at and what you like to do, married with what has the most impact or addresses the biggest need for your customers or your consumers, and then lastly, where there's some potential white space or less people competing around that key strength you have, that's a great candidate to pick as your point of difference.
I think you simplified it pretty well. Because what I was thinking when you were doing that was like Starbucks, where it's like, arguably good coffee, you may like it, you may not. You make like Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's or whoever, 7-Up or 7-Elevens.
Yeah.
But nobody has a better place to hang out and get a cup of coffee.
I know. There really isn't. And there is not, right?
I made a funny video. I go, WeWork has been disrupted by this new incumbent called Starbucks.
Really? Well, actually, I think Starbucks came out before WeWork. That was the original WeWorks, and it still is, right? I mean, you go there, and I bet they probably spend more on their bandwidth than most, businesses to fulfill all the internet needs of all their customers, right? It's crazy.
Because, you wouldn't say they're different. Some people would say it's coffee or the food, and it's good. I like it. I go there.
I think coffee's good. I think the food is very packaged. I don't know if you noticed that, but everything comes in little plastic.
Yeah, they heat it up and.
Yep, exactly.
It's certainly better than grocery store, but not as good as restaurant. But it's nice to just, even if you don't stay there, just to be able to walk in and not feel like you're at a fast food place.
So funny. Today I'm supposed to meet somebody, and we're like trying to figure out where. Oh, let's just meet at Starbucks. Yeah, of course. And then we say Starbucks at a certain city or a certain neighborhood in the city. Everyone kind of knows where that is, and it's a shortcut for trying to say, let me give you the address for this restaurant and let me text it to you. We just say Starbucks on blah. Oh yeah, sure, I'll see you there. Boom.
Yeah, it's that well known.
It is. It's better. Well, it's more well known than where your city hall is, than where your fire department is, and when the police department is. If you quizzed everybody on where the fire department or police department is, I bet half the people wouldn't even know.
And
But if you ask them about Starbucks, they'll definitely know.
And that's it. I remember a couple of years ago where Dunkin' Donuts was making this play against them, and everybody was worried. And I'm like, have you ever been to a Dunkin' Donuts?
I know, exactly.
You never say, let's meet at Dunkin's unless you're in Boston.
Yeah, unless you're like, you had a craving, and then literally you'd only be there for like 2 minutes, right?
Yeah, or let's meet at McDonald's or something. It's like,
right? No, yeah, exactly.
It doesn't
let's go
happen.
to the little the play area, you know.
Cool. Hey, so your book's gotten incredible reviews on Amazon. What would people get out of it if they invested the time and money to read it?
Well, I think you get some real important foundational building blocks of building a timeless brand, building a brand that has sort of three key qualities. And these are the qualities that make brands timeless and iconic. The first being really trying to hone in on what is your differentiation. And part of that is what we discussed, that key point of difference, right? And sort of that simple framework to really not only articulate what your promise is, but how you deliver that promise different than your competitors. Then a part of that differentiation also talks about how great companies really bring their points of difference to life with signature elements, things that make them noticed more than other people. You know, it could be everything from like I'll take beer, right? Like every time you see a beer silhouette, but with a lime in the neck, you know it's Corona. Yeah. And it's perfect because that signature element signifies their key point of difference, which is they are the beach beer. They are the vacation beer. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you want to have a slice of vacation or a zest of beach, get a Corona. And it's naked until you get that lime in it, right? So there's all these different things I talk about in terms of different signature elements. Like one of Apple's key signature elements is the unveiling of the product, right? So anyway, there's tons of ways to bring your point of difference to life and own it so that people, when they see that signature element, are constantly reminded about your key point of difference. And it's a shareable thing and a word of mouth type of thing. So that's number one they'd learn. The second thing is, how do you continue to make that point of difference relevant? Not only yesterday, not only today, but forever. And so there's all these tools around how do you stay relevant. And the first one I call noticing power in terms of how to get noticed. The second one called staying power in terms of how to be relevant yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And then lastly is once you have great noticing power with that great signature element and making it relevant, how do you scale it so as many people can see it that you want to become iconic to as possible? And again, in a B2B operation, it could just be your top 20 customers. But how do you make sure, if I was just to poll 3 of your clients or customers, would they all say the same thing about you? Hopefully, yes. Hopefully it's good, right? Okay, right. Yeah. Okay, so that's the first hurdle. Like they say the same thing. If they say 3 different things, then you don't really have a good signature, right? But let's say they say the same thing. The next hurdle on that is, would what they say be relevant, meaningful, and differentiated? And you may be meaningful and relevant, but if you're not differentiated, you're basically in a pool with a whole bunch of other people. But if you can actually pull 3 of your clients or customers and they can say the same thing about you, and it's meaningful, relevant, and differentiated, oh my God, you are on the path to build a really timeless brand. And the book really guides you through the process of building your brand to become noticed, relevant, and timeless.
Cool. Any preference for the format? Is Kindle just as good as hardback or Audible? Or
I would recommend either the Kindle or the book, just because the frameworks there. Even though the voiceover, the audio, it's not me, but whoever they hired is actually very pleasant to listen to, and it's great listening. But to make sure that you have the frameworks also to look at, because the graphics, I think those help tremendously in terms of if you were. I mean, the stories are great. You can listen to audio and great stories. But if you want to put it into practice, the book is the way to go, or the Kindle is the way to go.
And how about if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can reach me on my website at soonyu.com. That's SOONYU.com. And yeah, I'm totally always interested in to talk to people about their challenges, whether they be B2C or B2B.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Hey, I want to make sure you're checking out b2brevenue.com. That is where you can get a free copy of an ebook that I did. It's a real ebook. It's not a fluff book. It shows and talks about how companies make buying decisions and how you can influence that from both a marketing and a sales standpoint, how to find all the people that are in the decision path and what they need to see, know, and touch and feel before they make a product selection. If your team needs some coaching, some help, some training, some systems, some processes that do work today, because we know what doesn't work, or you know what doesn't work, I'll show you what does work and how to connect and get into pretty much any account. It includes deal coaching and content, community, and I can customize it for your particular company. Just go to b2brevenue.com, look under training, schedule a call with me. We can talk it over, or just sign up. You can pay per month or all at once, whichever makes most sense for your budget. Also, I put out videos pretty much daily on LinkedIn and on YouTube. On LinkedIn, it's Brian G. Burns, and on YouTube, it's Brian Burns Sales. Just search for that if you like to consume some video content. And if you see me on LinkedIn, please put a comment and a share and a like on some of the videos. I really appreciate it. I've got a company page for each podcast. This one, the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast, where I put both content and humor videos out daily. And tell a friend about the podcast. Really appreciate you listening. Check out the show notes for all the partners and the connections you can make there, the coupon codes for the products to evaluate them, see if they're a right match for you. And we'll see you next time.